So, good evening ladies, good evening gentlemen, good evening boys, good evening girls. Welcome to episode 5 of Chef's Club, where tonight we are doing something absolutely amazing. It is beef. Now, what beef, you ask yourself? Is it beef mince? Is it spaghetti bolognese? Is it a steak? Is it roast, whatever? This is the very best bit of beef, in my view. This, and I have washed my hands before somebody says anything, so please don't start writing and accusing me of being unhygienic. This is a really good bit of rib of beef. It is what I would call a côte de bœuf, and it comes, as you have heard from the my title of it, it's the rib. Okay, it is beautifully marbled. That means that it has little flecks of fat right in the middle of it, like that. It's got fat around the outside, and a lot of people say, I don't like the fat. But no. Do you remember the episode with the Iberico ham? The fat is the money. That is where all the taste comes from. This is a great steak, and it is about enough for 3 people, unless you happen to be Argentinian and Australian, when it's probably about half a portion. Okay, but it is quite rich, and it will feed 3 people quite easily. It's about 750 grams. Okay, there is what we are going to cook tonight. And to accompany it, normally you might think, oh well, I quite like sort of fried potatoes, and that was our original plan. You might like sort of potato dauphinoise, yeah, but we're not going to do that tonight. We feel that it's February and we ought to, perhaps not eat potatoes all the time. We're going on a slight slimming diet just for this evening, and I'm going to show you how to cook a really easy vegetable side dish, very Mediterranean, but it goes with almost anything, and that will be peppers cooked in the oven with a little bit of garlic and olive oil. It's a really easy dish and it's delicious. Very good way of getting one of your 5 a day. And to accompany that is Mrs. P Celeriac Roulade. This is a really lovely French dish, and she's made it from scratch, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later. But first, I've got to explain to you a little bit about how we're going to cook this beef. Now, a lot of people see a steak, they see a roast beef, and they put it in the oven, and they time how long it takes to cook. They take it out, and very sensibly, they always let it rest. That's great. And if you want to cook your rib of beef, côte de bœuf, I should call it really, like that, that's absolutely fine. But I want to introduce to you tonight a way of cooking that I've only just come across, which is absolutely amazing, and it's quite extraordinary how it changes and intensifies the flavour of the beef. We are going to cook this at low temperature. What's going to happen is that we will sear it in the pan here, and I'm going to switch this on right now. I should have done that a little, no, that's not the right one. Right now, we're going to sear it for about 4, maybe 5 minutes. Okay, it's going to go brown all over, it's going to caramelise. In the pan already, we have a little bit of leftover bacon fat. Now, we're using bacon fat because it is leftover and it's very tasty. But obviously, you could just use a little bit of oil. Vegetable oil is absolutely fine. Maybe olive oil, but nothing too expensive. Okay. After we've seared it, we'll take it out of the pan. We'll season it really well with salt and pepper, and particularly pepper. And then we will put it into the oven, and we will cook it right in the oven here for probably about 90 minutes, but at a very low temperature, 80 degrees. Now, when I first heard that, I thought, but that's going to mean it's going to be all grey in the middle and it's going to be overcooked. Not in the least. It'll be beautiful, juicy, ready pink, however you like it. Okay? I'll explain the principle that lies behind that a little bit later. Now, this pan is just warming up, so as it warms up, I'm going to explain to you some precautions you may have to take. Now, when you are searing beef, this pan here, it's going to be very hot, and you need, boys and girls, you really need to have somebody else around if you're going to be doing this, because it's super hot and it can be a spit, and it can be a bit dangerous. Now, because we're recording, we're not going to be able to use the extractor fan because it means you won't be able to hear what's happening. So we are going to open the window though, but it will create a lot of smoke. So you've got to switch on your extractor fan, when you do this. So what's been happening this week? Well, it's nearly half term, isn't it? You've only got 5 days to go. Isn't it amazing how fast that time goes? I hope you've really got used to, the online learning and are beginning to enjoy it. We all realise how very difficult and challenging that can be. But I think we ought to remember how lucky we are as well to be able to do it in the way that we are doing it. Not all pupils in the country, can have online lessons live in the way that you do. But I reckon that you will really have deserved your half term very much. I think certainly the boys who I've been teaching in year 7 and 8 have worked really hard, and I'm very pleased with that. Now look, let's see whether we can start. It's not quite hot enough. It needs to feel, obviously don't touch it, it needs to feel really hot. Alright, so that it sears, and you're going to hear that when we put it in. Now if I was to put it in now, I don't think it would sear. Okay, I'm going to try that. Oh, it is. So we're going to wait just a tiny bit till it's even hotter and the pan starts smoking, and then we'll put it in. Anyway, half term, lovely opportunity to get a nice long bit of rest away from your computers, okay? And this, as you remember, this is what that is about. All of these activities that your teachers have been encouraging you to do. For example, when I arrived here just a few minutes ago, I walked into the sitting room to find an entire guide camp set up indoors. Okay, so the girls here have been thinking, right, we can't go to guide camp, but we're going to do it online, and they made make-up tents with various blankets. They did all their activities. It was absolutely excellent. Now I would encourage you, obviously your parents may not necessarily want you to make a scout camp in the middle of your sitting rooms every day, but I would encourage you to take up some activities. Catch up on your episodes of Chef's Club, okay? Do some cooking, get out there, take some exercise, rejuvenate. Now, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing that it is beginning very slowly to start to smoulder and smoke. So I'm going to put this in like that. Did you hear that? That's the sound that you want to hear. Now we're not really going to do much with it now. We're going to leave it alone for a minute or two, and then we're going to start turning it around and searing it on every side. Now to do that, we really need to use an implement like this. Now if you see me taking it by the bone, it's because I'm not thinking, and that's what I would do if I was on my own, but you really do need to be rather careful when you're doing this. So get an adult into the room now if you've already started. What else is there to talk about? Haircuts. I think you all need to have a haircut. Oh, but how are we going to do that, you ask? The hairdressers are not open. That's barbers. They're not open. Well, I've managed, and so, in fact, has Mr. Parky. So we've had 2 lockdown haircuts. He, very luckily, has a very talented lady wife to do this. I had to do mine on my own. Okay? If you can learn how to do that without making a complete pig's ear of it over lockdown, that'll be very impressive. Here we are. Now, here we go. I'm going to turn it over using this quite carefully. Now, there is a very nice bacony, beefy smell coming out of that. Now, here's a little tip, okay? Take a sharp knife, and you can see that there's little rings of fat. Score them, okay? Score them with the end of the knife, like that. Just the fat bits. And you can let your knife go quite far in. Now, why am I doing that? Well, that's because when it goes into the oven at a very low temperature, that fat will melt, and what will happen is that it will melt out over the beef and it will baste the beef. That means to say it'll be like a liquid that keeps it moist and prevents it from being dry. And of course, because the fat is in itself the tasty part, that increases the flavour of your roast. And when it comes out, it'll be absolutely amazing. There we go, it's going out nicely there. I'm just going to make sure I've got my... Of course, you could do this before you put it in. It doesn't matter too much, but as long as you do score it a little bit. We're going to carry on like this for another few minutes, okay? If I'll turn it over to the other side, you can see, there we go, you see it's become brown. That browning there is caramelization. There's natural sugars in the meat, you see, and that's what creates deep taste. And you're going to lay it on like that. You've got to be a bit careful. As I said, it is really worth getting somebody to give you a hand. Right, there we are. Just going to score that so that the fat can easily melt. Now, if I ever have to do a roast of a very good piece of beef, I will now always do it like this, because the slow method of cooking releases such incredible flavour. It's quite different to anything else, except possibly barbecuing. Oh. Yeah, with the lid on. Yeah,
we're still doing this in the summer.
Well, we can try controlling the temperature of the barbecue. So I'm going to do the other side down. Look, here on it goes like that. So as you can see, it can be a bit fiddly. You've got to be very careful. There's not so much fat there, but yeah, leave it like that for a little bit. Now, what I've done, as you know, because I pointed it out earlier, is I've heated the oven up to 80 degrees. Now, this is a chance for me to talk to you a little bit about ovens. Now, what I'm going to tell you is my opinion, okay, so you must obviously do what your mum and your dad, whoever's in charge, tells you to do. But what I think is that ovens are notoriously inaccurate when it comes to the temperature. So if you put, for example, 150, it's not very likely that it will be exactly 150 degrees. You'd have to have a seriously expensive oven for that. So it's worth buying a little oven thermometer that you can see in there, right there, okay, to tell you what the actual temperature is in there. At the moment it's telling me just north of 80, but on the dial it says 50. Now, ovens with fans, you cannot use those to cook this. It has to be an oven where you can turn the fan off, or which doesn't have a fan. And the reason is that the fan is very useful if you're cooking multiple things in the oven, because it blows hot air around. Actually, when you're cooking only one thing, a fan has a tendency to burn. And when you set a fan oven, see, you want to keep an eye on it because that's fallen over. When you set a fan oven to say 150 or 180 and leave it, it's likely to go up quite a bit further. So you need to, I would suggest, if you're serious about your cooking, buy an oven thermometer. Now, I'm quite happy with that being at 80. That's good. It's actually a much better oven than the one I have at home because it holds its temperature. I tried doing this at home for the first time and the oven just went up and down and up and down. It was very difficult. So 80 is where you want that to be 80 centigrade. Okay. Here we have, we're still going with our caramelisation here. I think that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to keep it in for a minute or two longer. Alright. Remember, good 5 minutes of searing, not massively hot, but you want it lovely and brown over the outside. There you go. I reckon that's nearly ready. So as it's nearly ready, I'm going to take out the roasting pan that I've already put in here. That's going to go here. Going to be a bit careful because 80 degrees still is very hot. We're going to switch off the hob and we're going to transfer the beef onto, very carefully, okay, again, get somebody to help you, onto the pan like that. Then you can take the pan off the heat. Alright? The only thing left to do here is to season, and to season well. Alright? Because it's already seared, you know, you don't need to worry about putting on salt or anything. If you put the salt on, alright? There's one side done. Not too much salt, but some nevertheless. Turn it over, do the other side. There we go, not too much salt again. Now, I would guess that you could also put other things on. However, this is such a good bit of beef that I'm just going to absolutely leave it like that. But I suppose you could add a few dried herbs or if you wanted. You can do this with other cuts of meat, like lamb. So you might sort of get a really nice leg of lamb or a boneless leg of lamb. And if you were doing that and cooking it very, very slowly like this, I would suggest putting garlic in it. But that is such good beef that we're going to leave it alone. Okay? Now, let me introduce you to my new toy. This is a meat thermometer. Now, you don't have to have this to do this recipe, but it does help. Because the science behind this is that you want the very low temperature of the oven to heat up the inside of the meat, that obviously is what is cooking it, to a certain degree. And the certain degree is somewhere between 60 and 65 centigrade. And when the interior part of the meat gets to that temperature, that is when it is ready to cook, because you'll know at that temperature it's exactly right in the middle. So I'm going to insert this in a thick part of the meat, like that. Okay, now it's gone straight through, so you've got to be careful you put it in the right way. I'm going to, hopefully that will switch itself on. There we go. Up we go here. It's going to go in here. Alright. It's all sort of oven proof, this, I'm going to shut the door. This is very handily metallic. And there we have, on the front, there is the interior, the inside temperature of that côte de bœuf, that bit of rib. At the moment, it's 33.7 centigrade. We will know that the roast will be ready when it gets to somewhere around 60 to 65 centigrade. Sort of depends on how you like your beef, really. If you want it rare, as in pretty rare, you would probably take it out at 60. If you wanted it to be more on the rare to medium rare, a little bit higher. So we're going to go somewhere in between. And let's see how it works. It should take probably about 90 minutes. 90 minutes. And it'll go up in temperature very, very slowly. And you just need to keep an eye and make sure that that doesn't go too far above or too far below 80 degrees. Okay? Let's see how that works. See you later. Well, good evening and welcome to yet another episode of Mr. Edwards' Life Skills. So, you know that I'm a keen drinker of wine. Now, that does not mean that I drink loads and loads and gallons of wine. Actually, it's the contrary. I'm sorry, we've put off by extremely unprofessional conduct of the director here. No, the thing about wine, gentlemen, is that you need to obviously not drink it until you are of the legal age. Although your mum and dad may say to you at some stage in the future, would you like to try this? In which case I suggest that you do try it, because remember what we're trying to do when we're in lockdown is to take up new things, to try new things, to sort of have a few new experiences. So this is a sort of family show, so I thought it would be quite fun just to show everybody how to decant a bottle of wine, talk a little bit about corkscrews and that sort of thing. Everybody loves wine, really. I think most people would like to have it, once or twice a week with their meal, or maybe more, or maybe less than that. And in certain cultures, like mine in France, it is an accepted thing that wine should be served with a meal. You'll know from your mum and dad, and from going to restaurants and things like this, that people tend to drink certain wines with certain foods. For example, a red wine like this, people would quite enjoy that with beef, or a red meat, for example. Maybe they would also like it with some cheese. And white wines tend to be drunk either on their own, or perhaps if it's a dry white wine, with some fish. If it's a quite rich white wine, people sometimes quite enjoy that with creamy chicken sauces, or with veal sauces, or creamy pork sauces, or things like that. Sweet white wine you might want to match with pudding. So there's always a great debate about what wine should I have with this and what wine should I do. Oh, the answer is just sort of be sensible. You wouldn't want to, for example, to serve an enormous red wine with something that is very delicate, like smoked salmon or a fish in a beautiful white wine sauce. That would be silly. So you just use your common sense when it comes to matching wines to foods. And essentially, it's a free world. You can do what you like. And the idea that you should never serve red wine with fish is rubbish. Of course you can. Just you have to use your common sense about it. Now, there is something about red wine, though, that I think it's important to know. This is a quite modest bottle of red wine. Okay, it's a 2011 Côte de Bourg. That means it comes from an area quite close to Bordeaux. It's nothing incredibly special, but it's very tasty. It would benefit from being decanted. That enables the wine to aerate as you pour it into this decanter, this which is a type of jug. And it's always worth doing that maybe an hour or two before you serve wine. It's not suitable for every red wine. You wouldn't do it with a great old and very delicate Burgundy, for example. That might not be a good idea, but it might be just to enable this to sort of develop its aromas and its tastes. So I have opened the bottle. I've used, this is the corkscrew that I tend to use. I favour this style. These are called Waiter's Friends, and they have a sort of little movable lever that you can prise open the corkscrew with. We've got a few of these here. There's another one, sort of quite elegant metal one, and here's one here that is from Get the Essentials from Blackwell Science. So bookstores, they know what's important in life. And here's something called a screw pull, where you simply screw the thing into the cork and carry on, and by doing so it levers the cork out of the bottle. And you have all sorts of other sort of fancy gadgets. Basically, like these, the simpler the better. So I have opened my bottle of wine, and now I am going to decant it. I'm sure I don't need to tell you how to open a bottle of wine, but boys, you only ever do that if your mum and dad say that you must do it, and when they're around, so they can keep an eye on you. So here we are. We're going to pour it in. You can rest the thing on the lip, but you must be careful not to damage the decanter. So you can see it's going in right down the side like that. Sometimes when you want to aerate it a lot, I've seen people slosh it in quite sort of vigorously. I mean, the younger a wine is, the more you need to do that, but I wouldn't, to be honest. Now what you've got to watch out for is that when wine ages in a bottle, red wine in particular, it tends to leave a deposit, a sort of what we call a lees. And you'll see that there are little bits of black just coming out there, and so that's when you stop. And you're going to leave those in the bottom of the bottle right here, because you can see, I'm going to take this up to the camera. Can I do that, guys? You might be able to see right here where the bottle has been lying down. The leaves have sort of collected along the side there. Now you don't want to have those inside the wine. There's nothing wrong with them. It's a completely natural, in fact it's a sign of a good wine. It's just a deposit that sort of accumulates over time, but you don't want to eat it. Okay, it just doesn't taste very nice. But don't worry, you're not going to poison yourself if accidentally you do that. So, what was the purpose of this life skill? It's not very relevant to young children to know how to decant wine. I realise that, and I understand that you boys, you really you shouldn't think that you must do this all the time, and you must take your parents' guidance. But the main point I really want to make is that drinking wine and alcohol is something that you should always do in moderation, but which is actually, if you do it properly, a great pleasure in life, and which accompanies important things like sociability, being with friends, having a civilized meal, not bolting your food and rushing out. And I want you perhaps to, when it is time for you to approach wine, when your mum and dad think it's time for you to try starting things, to remember that. It's not something to be necked, it's something to be savoured and appreciated. And this sort of method of decanting and all this ritual of of doing that, and perhaps when you've also laid the table, that is part of preparing yourself. And that's the life lesson for today. Enjoy wine in moderation. Remember, it's something that is there for you to enable you to be sociable and to taste. It's an experience, okay? Not the means to an end. And that's the life lesson for today. So, welcome back. Now, why do you think it is that I'm looking so happy? Well, the reason is that the beef, several reasons actually, the beef has been in for nearly an hour, and I'm going to talk to you about what's happened to it in a little minute. The other sort of thing that we were quite happy about is, well, at least I am, is that Scotland has just won against England at rugby. Okay. So, beef. Now, I understand, probably one of the favourite dishes of Christopher Plummer, who very sadly died yesterday. Absolutely wonderful actor. And we all ought to start watching a few of his films whenever we can to remember him. So that's the day that we are on today, just to give you a little history check. Now, the beef. Here we are. Now, Mrs. P is going to sort of zoom in here. You can see that in just under an hour, it's gone up to 43 degrees. Very, very, very slowly. Now, it's going to take probably another 45 minutes to another hour to get to that temperature that we want, okay, which is 62, 3, 61, 2, that sort of time. It goes up very, very slowly. And as it rises and rises, remember the fat is slowly melting and basting the top of the meat. Now, we did find we have to keep a bit of an eye on this, okay, because the temperature of the thermometer, okay, indicates that quite often the oven heats up over 80 degrees, and you've got to keep an eye on that. You don't want it to sort of be 80 going on 100 degrees. You need it to be 80 going on 80 degrees, if you catch my drift. Okay, so sometimes you may need to switch it down a little bit, switch it up a little bit, just to keep it around about the 80 mark. At the moment it's about 90, but as I've opened the door, it'll go down eventually. Okay, so I'll close that for the moment, okay, and we'll have another look at it later. So, what did we say that we were going to accompany this dish by? I reckon we have this beautiful dish of Celeriac Roulade. Now, the way that's a celeriac, that's a sort of, it looks like the centre of a big cauliflower on heat. I mean, it's just like a sort of nasty looking thing, really.
Surprisingly hairy.
It's very hairy on the outside, and it's never very expensive. It's one of a sort of quite cheap root vegetable that you can sort of buy, and you just cut away all of the outside. And what Mrs. P has done is that you grate it, and then you add a little bit of mayonnaise, I believe a little bit of lemon juice, salt and pepper, mustard, whichever mustard types you like. I think, Claire, you used...
We're mostly Dijon and a bit of whole grain.
Bit of whole grain, so that makes it look very nice because you've got the little grains of mustard, gherkins, capers. Really, really good. Okay, that's
fresh garlic.
Yeah, fresh garlic as well. I like it even more. Now, that's going to cut through a lot of the richness of the meat. So we have something else here, peppers, that can accompany this. Now, quite often, when you have a big gathering of people and you've got to cook for everyone, these days you get quite a few problems because one person doesn't like meat and another person can't eat fish, and then you've got a third person who maybe is a vegetarian or whatever, and it creates rather a lot of problems in the kitchen. So how do you solve a problem like that? I can tell you, with a dish that everybody can eat. Now, we're all meat eaters here, but we understand that not everybody can eat meat. This dish of peppers, anybody can eat, okay? And, quite frankly, it's simple, and you climb a mountain to go and eat some of these things, and it's cheap, and you can do it for everyone. Now, what's happened here is I've got a selection of peppers. You can use the long ones. I've just bought these ones here, and look how colourful they are. I'm going to cut them in half and take out the inside. But because it looks pretty, you can leave the little stalks on, although you don't actually end up eating those. Now, I'm going to try and leave the stalk on, as I said, so I'm going to cut first straight through the middle of the stalk and then reverse it and halve it like that. That's what they look like inside. Now, you need to get rid of these little white pithy bits and the seeds. So you're going to cut down there, being quite careful. There we go, cut along there, and it sort of all comes out. Give it a quick tap, and there you are. I'll just very quickly do the same with the other one. There we are, there we go, down the middle, out comes the pith. You don't need to be too scientific about it. Look at those, a few of my favourite things right there. Now, what are the other things that we're going to add to this? A little bit of garlic, chopped reasonably thin, okay, minding your fingers of course, putting that in the bottom. And one of the things I meant to tell you about this is it's very adaptable, like a lot of the recipes that we're learning about in Chef's Club. I like to add in garlic, a little bit of some herbs. You know, we've got some oregano here, olive oil, tiny bit of balsamic vinegar and salt and pepper. Very, very simple, anybody can have that. But you can do other things as well. You could put perhaps a few tomatoes on the inside. You could, one of my favourites is to put capers and anchovies on the inside, and that becomes a sort of odd sort of interpretation of an Italian dish called bagna cauda. All right. Now let's just carry on with our very, very simple. Anybody can eat this dish. Okay. We've got some oregano, so I'm going to put a bit of oregano in. There we go, like that, to give it a little herby taste. Chilies would work very well with this as well. Here is olive oil. You need to be reasonably generous because these are going to cook in the oven, okay, and you don't want them to sort of dry out. All right, there we go. So essentially the amount that you use, it needs to cover well the bottom of the pepper and a bit of the outside like that. And then a little bit of balsamic vinegar for the sort of sweet sourness of it. You put your thumb over the end, you know, it won't all splash in. And then the only thing I've got left to do is obviously plenty of pepper. Obviously don't use pepper if you're using things like chilies, because you know it's going to be far too hot. And salt. And that, ladies and gents, is that's all you need to do. And you want to put those in a moderate oven, about 150, 60, 70, that sort of thing. But get it in there. You don't use the fan if you can avoid it, because it will just burn it. But leave them in there for 30, 40 minutes, or until they're soft. Take them out and they're ready. And the great thing is, you of course can prepare them in advance. So if you are going off on a great big expedition up a mountain, you've got to ford loads of streams and stuff like that, they can just sit in your backpack and you can have them for lunch. Terribly healthy. Now, what else? I think that's about it for the moment. Let me just tell you, in the last, 5-6 minutes, yeah, our temperature is up to 44.1, and because we just opened the oven just a little bit, we've got that interior oven temperature down to about just 85, 90, which is okay, but we're still not going to let it get any higher than that. I reckon in about 40 minutes that will be at 65 degrees roughly, and when it's like that we can tuck in to the beef, which is going to be absolutely delicious. Now it's time for an intermission. Cheers. So, here I am, here we are, of course, and it's now, I would say, 2 hours or so after, 2 hours and a bit after we put the meat in, probably 2 hours, 20 minutes, so a bit longer than I said before. And the meat we've been measuring with our special thermometer, which you saw earlier, and we think that it's reached about 60 degrees. Okay, so 60 degrees internal temperature of the meat is going to mean that you're going to get something that's fairly medium. All right, now we're going to take it out. Now, this is the moment of truth. Look at this. Ladies and gentlemen, what a work of art. Here we are. Okay? It's such a good piece of meat. It hasn't rendered a lot of juice. All of it has stayed within the meat itself, cooked and basted very slowly by its own fat. So there is what we're going to eat tonight. I showed you the celeriac earlier on. We've had the peppers, which came out of the oven after about half an hour, and you can see there's that nice and warm. They're soft, a little bit caramelized around the edges. And of course, you remember, like a lot of these dishes, those are very adaptable. You can add little things into them to make them more substantial, which makes them appeal to all sorts of people. So if you have a problem, like a dinner party full of people who like different things, that's something that everybody can eat. Now, what we're going to do is lift off the beef from its roasting tray. 2.5 hours at 80 degrees. And let's see how it is. You don't need to let this rest. Now, a lot of meat eaters will go, oh, Mr. Edwards is completely wrong. No, I'm not actually. Because you have cooked it at a low temperature. Therefore, because the temperature surrounding the meat in the oven is much closer to the meat, the internal temperature that you want it to be, you don't have to let it rest. Okay, it's only when you've been cooking at very high temperature that needs to happen. But, having said that, if you need to leave it for 5-10 minutes, it's fine. So let's just cut one bit off to see how it looks. Okay?
And then give it to the director.
So there you have. I said I was going to cook you something medium, and there it is. Perfectly pink. That's what you're going to get if you take it out at about 58 to 60 degrees centigrade internal temperature. So it's definitely worth buying one of those probes that you can put in the meat. Okay? Now, next time I do this, I'm going to take it out at a much lower temperature because I happen to like meat quite rare. But you need to be a bit careful the first time you do it. Okay? That, even though people will say, well, it's medium, therefore it's not going to be as tender, it's not going to be as this or that, that will taste more beefy than, I reckon, most other beef that you've tasted. Okay? And I am not going to try it myself. We're going to ask an independent pair of judges to try it. So here's one that I'm going to hand to Mrs. P. Here you go, Claire. And another one that I'm going to hand to Herr Director.
Oh, wow.
Now, because you've cooked it incredibly slowly,
It's really tender.
It's so tender, and it's still red and pink, or however you happen to like it. Even if you cook it to 65 degrees and it's it's sort of medium to well done, it'll still be pink and tender and beautiful.
But it's so beefy.
And it's so beefy because it is the beef itself, the fat in the beef, these bits right here, that have basted it and kept it and melted slowly and kept it moist. Now that, if you can manage to cook a really good quality bit of beef, rib, fillet, sirloin, that sort of thing, like that, and you've got enough time, that's the way to do it. I promise you, you will absolutely adore it. Now, what have we long got to do now? Hills are alive. It's nearly time for supper. We've been waiting here for far too long, and quite frankly feeling quite as hungry and lonely as the goat herd on the hill. So we're going to sign off now. Now remember, please keep up your good habits. That routine when you're working from home is crucial so that you can maintain energy. Don't go to bed too late. Get up in the morning, have yourself a good breakfast, get out and away from your screen to take some exercise. If you do those things, you're going to enjoy yourself, and you must do them when you're on holiday as well so that you can really recover much quicker. Most importantly of all, look after your family and stay safe. So, I think that's about the end. We're going to sign off now. So it's so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, good night. We're off to watch The Sound of Music, and eat this delicious beef. See you next time.